the bench by a Republican governor and often considered a conservative judge. And he writes, Dale Ho, as his career path makes clear, has strong progressive convictions. This could easily have made for some tension in our chambers, but it did not. Not because Dale was shy in expressing his views, but because he knew how to do so appropriately and respectfully. Former Judge Smith writes, he's not one of those people, of whom there are all too many today, who think of members of a different political tribe as the enemy. If he were, I do not think he would have clerked for me and remained my friend since. It's a pretty positive letter and addresses the charges that were made. Members are allowed, of course, to make draw their own conclusions. If no one else seeks...
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn, of course.
Mr. Chairman, I won't try to improve on the excellent comments made by Senator Lee and Senator Cruz, but I just want to point out some of the other criticism that Mr. Ho has directed not at members of the committee, but at the members of the Supreme Court of the United States. And his belief that apparently the Constitution does not apply equally to every American, but should be applied preferentially to groups that he favors. The first case I want to mention is the NAACP versus Alabama case, which establishes the important principle under the First Amendment that we have a freedom to associate with whomever we please, regardless of political ideology. You'll recall that case, the state of Alabama sought to identify the members of the NAACP members, presumably not for benign purposes. Mr. Ho, after the Supreme Court rendered a decision dealing with the issue of whether a PAC had to identify contributors to that PAC, he suggested that the First Amendment should only apply to protect advocacy groups from compelled disclosure laws when such laws are applied to minority or dissident groups. We understand what a minority is. I don't know what a dissident, if you restrict it to dissident groups, I presume that would span the political spectrum. There are dissidents, I assume, on the right and on the left. But the idea that the freedom of association under the First Amendment would only apply to some Americans and not others is a stunning position. Likewise, when the Supreme Court of the United States decided the scope of the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, and established that it was an individual right, he said that the Supreme Court's decision was cavalier. And he said that local communities ought to be able to decide for themselves the scope of the Constitution. Again, not a what I would call a mainstream view among the legal profession. The other thing that troubles me about Mr. Ho is his comment. Senator Cruz alluded to this when Vanita Gupta was nominated to her position at the Justice Department. She originally came in here and said that basically attacked law enforcement on the basis that systemic racism tainted law enforcement. And then I remember specifically when I pressed her about systemic racism, that means we're all racist, including you. She said, well, it's structural racism. Mr. Ho tweeted a comment where he said that structural racism is a feature of every American institution, and that we all have implicit biases. He said that's not controversial, that's the truth. I'm not sure whether Mr. Ho was asked about his biases or not. Actually, his biases are not implicit, they're explicit, as Senator Cruz did an excellent job of pointing out. So whether it's a church, a synagogue, a mosque, it's the current occupant of the White House, members of the United States Senate, the House of Representatives, whether it's law enforcement or other first responders, Mr. Ho believes that they're all biased. I think someone with those views certainly is entitled to express those views under the First Amendment, and I respect his right to express those views, but I believe that his lack of a judicial temperament disqualifies him from this nomination and this position. And so I will be voting against the nomination.
Senator Kennedy.